you asked me about my first impressions, and that was one of the things I noticed first was that people were exceptionally friendly there. I've traveled to a lot of places on my own, and this was one place where I felt like the most welcomed out of anywhere probably I've ever been. Hi, everybody. My name is Sophia. I'm the editorial director. I live and invest overseas. And today we have Kat Kalashian, live and invest overseas, Europe expert, back on the line with us. Kat, it's great to have you on once again. Thank you for being here with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to hear more about Madeira. I can't wait.
Yes. So today, Kat and I will be speaking about Madeira. And if you don't already know about it, it is an autonomous region of Portugal. So it's an archipelago made up of 3 main islands that float about 1,000 kilometers southwest of the Portuguese mainland, kind of in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean. The archipelago is actually closer to Morocco than it is Portugal. And it's on the same latitude as Bermuda. And it also sits in the Gulf Stream, which is an oceanic tidal system that delivers both warm water and warm weather. So temperatures are always pleasant in Madeira. The weather's always great. It's always springtime. Despite being sort of removed from mainland Portugal, Madeira is still very much a part of Portugal, both culturally and historically. So it's a really interesting mixture of things. And I think it makes a lot of sense as a retirement or just general expat destination, despite the fact that not many people, it's not on many people's radar at the moment. So normally I'd be interviewing Kat, but since I went to Madeira, Kat's going to be asking me the questions. So feel free, Kat, to kick it off at any time.
Right. So what were your first impressions then?
Okay, the first one was just confusion because it looks so much like Hawaii. I've never actually been to Hawaii, but I'm imagining what Hawaii looks like. Like big, green, lush mountainsides and cliffs that plunge down into the ocean. Tons of tropical vegetation. So like hibiscus flowers, there's wild pineapple and banana. It was April and super warm. Like you could just, again, I was coming from London, so I could immediately feel the change in temperature and the humidity, which for me is all very comforting. I like those. I like warmer weather personally. So it was very disorientating. I was thinking, where am I actually? It also reminded me a bit of Bali, where I've spent some time. So it's kind of jarring to think that you're in Europe, but like nowhere in Europe that you've ever imagined. Very tropical Europe. And yeah, we kind of coined the phrase Europe Plus. So it's, again, culturally very European, but the surroundings, the landscape, the scenery, the temperature, the ocean water, the surfing capabilities, the cuisine even, like there's a lot of dishes that involve passion fruit and banana and mango and things that are not classical Europe.
Yeah, no, this sounds like my kind of place. Everything is really striking a chord. And I do remember in your coverage of it, you did kind of nickname it the Hawaii of Europe, which is kind of such a bizarre mishmash of things in your mind. And right, like to think of passion fruit and bananas, those things are imported into Europe. We don't generally see those in our lives here. So that's very cool. And so what do you think is the main appeal for expats living there? Well, I guess maybe I should say, are there many expats living there? And what is the appeal for those who do live there?
Yes. So I was surprised by this. So in total, the archipelago has about 250,000 people. And around 10,000 of that number are expats. And they're mainly British and German expats.
Far more than I would have expected.
Yeah. For such a small island. Like you can drive from one side of it to the other in about an hour. So you wouldn't expect to have such a good expat population. But from what I understand, there's kind of 2 different groups. There's the old school expat group, which is made up of British and German retirees who came over, I'm going to say in the 80s and 90s. One of them actually told me that the UK used to have a sort of like package holiday promotion to Madeira. And so a lot of them came over for the first time using that promotion and then just loved it so much that they stayed, which I can totally understand.
Yeah, we've heard that story quite a few hundred times, I think, over the course of our careers.
Exactly. And then there's a kind of a new wave of expats who have come in the past 2-3 years because Madeira has this really innovative digital nomad village. So during the pandemic, Portugal launched a digital nomad visa, like many countries around the world. But Madeira in particular, it wasn't receiving any tourists. It's sort of hard to reach in a normal travel scenario, but during the pandemic, everything was just shut down basically, and they knew they needed a new pull factor, basically, a reason to get people to Madeira. So they jumped on that digital nomad visa, and then they created a digital nomad village, basically by taking over a village that already existed and adapting all the infrastructure and creating the workspaces and making sure the internet speed was up to snuff, and setting up short-term rental businesses to support this digital nomad village. And so now there's a newer wave of younger expats, and they're from literally all over the world. There's definitely a lot more Americans, just North Americans in general, but people from all over the place, Eastern Europe, I don't know, South Africa, everywhere you can imagine.
That sounds great. And so you mentioned the climate, that it's beneficially affected by the Gulf Stream, but is there any seasonal change? So, in January, February versus summer, is there anything that changes, even humidity wise? Is there a monsoon season? What is the climate here year round?
So this is interesting. So I'm just generalizing the whole island. It's steady throughout the year. I'm really bad. I've lived in Fahrenheit countries and Celsius countries, and now I'm kind of completely lost on both systems. So I can't tell you exactly what the yearly average is, but it is spring-like to warm year-round. But then there's a difference between the northern part of the island and the southern part of the island. So there's microclimate zones. The northern half is more elevated, and it has a much rainier, grayer, more like, let's say, Irish style climate, whereas the south is full on sunshine, more summer, south of Portugal or Spain type weather. So you can kind of get to Madeira and pick and choose what exactly you want, but it's going to be at least warm year round. It's a spring-like destination. And as I mentioned, the Gulf Stream is a big part of that. So it's just channeling in warm water year round, which is nice because then you can swim year round as well. But it brings in warm weather, and also the latitude. It's the same. I mean, if you know Bermuda, right, it's the same sort of climate as you'd get on Bermuda.
Well, it is interesting that you say it's so different from the north to the south, because we always point this out to people about Portugal and Spain, that the south coast is very, very different from the north coast. But if you're driving from the south of Spain to the north of Spain, it's going to take you like 15 hours. It sounds like if you're on Madeira, you could, have your morning by the Irish seaside with a nice mist on your face, and then go have lunch in the afternoon, where it's nice and warm.
And that's also a benefit, whether or not it sounds like it, to have like a rainy, sort of grayish weather zone, because it has a natural water supply, which is a huge benefit and in any country, but especially when you're on a tiny island in the middle of the ocean. You want to know that your water supply is not going to be affected by anything else going on in the world.
Very good point.
So, yeah, and it also, they say that it affects the cuisine there. So part of the reason why, for instance, they're really famous for this type of bread that they make, and they say it's all down to their natural water source, and that influences absolutely everything. The taste and the flavor, everything's very fresh and healthy and delicious.
Well, and the greenery you mentioned, the way you describe it in your issue, it sounds like, like you were saying, like the Hawaii, or, I think of living in Panama, where there's the rainforest kind of all around you all the time. And you don't get that unless you've got a good amount of rain all the time. So that's exactly great. And so there isn't any kind of rainy season per se. It's just kind of the precipitation is kind of steady.
I think that they have like a 2-season situation, sort of like Panama, what you're describing, where it does get rainier up in the north during certain months, maybe like spring months. Mm-hmm. for instance. But because it has these microclimate zones, you can always just drive a couple miles and you're in a totally different weather situation. And just generally speaking, north is rainy and south is sunny. So I experienced that when I was there. We were driving all over the island, and yeah, we got like misty, cool weather up in the north, and then 30 minutes later, you're in blasting sunshine. So if you don't like the weather, you can, simply move a couple minutes in a different direction.
What it was your impression of the rental market, for example? Would somebody be able to go there and find a place to live for a month?
Yes. So I would say if you're going for just 1 month, the best bet is probably going to be just Airbnb or something similar like VRBO. I think there might be a Europe specific version of that as well. Maybe it is VRBO, but for a 1 month rental, I would just go for Airbnb. It's not that expensive. Like you could probably find something for a couple $100 for a month. They do have some restrictions on short-term rentals, so it could be difficult if you're looking for something for, let's say, like 3 to 6 months. It might not be as easy to find. Whereas like a 1 month, I would treat that as sort of like a holiday rental sort of thing. And they definitely will have something for that.
Right. When you are doing those inquiries, if you're looking on whatever rental site, the prices that you're going to see per night or per week are definitely going to be different than if you get in touch with that person and say you want to stay for multiple weeks. In almost every single case, the landlord or the manager is going to work with you for a more reasonable monthly rate or weekly rate. And so they're also curious about how this digital nomad visa works. Can you give us a little bit of some more details about what the requirements might be if that person wanted to try and take that avenue to live there?
Yes, for sure. And actually, this kind of relates to the previous question. So as I mentioned, they have this digital nomad village. And I interviewed one of the founders of the startup behind it. And she explained that one of the main benefits of the village is joining this like community Slack group, which Slack is like
Skype.
Yeah, like a messaging platform. And you can join that community, whether or not you plan on moving to Madeira, whether or not you plan on doing digital nomad stuff. It's open to anyone. And through that, you can like ask any sort of question you might have. For instance, where can I find a 1 month rental? I need an electrician, whatever. It's kind of like a forum for discussing anything. And most of the people on there are expats. They have previous experience with all the stuff that you'll encounter when you try out life in a new place. About the digital nomad visa. So it's, I believe it gets you a 1 year residency permit. And it's a little bit expensive to qualify for. You need to prove that you have 3,040 euros, very specific, in monthly income in order to qualify. But it allows you to stay there for a year at a time, which is great. If you're American or Canadian, you can only stay in the Schengen area, not just Portugal, but the entire, however many countries it is, for 90 days within a 180-day period. So 3 months every 6 months. So the digital nomad visa could be a good option if you're looking to try out life here, but don't want to fully commit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. And yeah, these visas, they've been popping up all over the world since COVID, and they really are a boon for people who want to go for just a year or 2 years. And regardless, like the nomad thing is kind of irrelevant at that point. You're not necessarily a nomad if you're living there, but the point is these are great visa options. So don't let the digital nomad thing throw you off, and just take a look at what those requirements are. What is it like to fly in and out? How easy is it to get there from North America or throughout the rest of Europe? What are the connections like?
Okay, so they have a direct flight from Madeira to New York, JFK, and supposedly there's going to be another direct flight to Toronto in Canada. It's in the works. And then for Europe, I believe that during peak season, there's connections, direct flights to 30 or so cities. And then obviously they have regular flights to Lisbon, which is a 2-hour flight away, at least once a day.
And so how are people spending their time here? It sounds like nature and hiking and I guess anything to do with water sports are going to be some of your main pastimes. Apart from that, is there, is there much culture here? I mean, I know a lot of places in the world don't even have cinemas. So let's start there. Like, are there movie theaters? Are there, concert halls, anything, any kind of larger culture going on?
Yes. So the main population zone is Funchal, and it has kind of like an old town and a newer area. And the old town has everything that you'd want from a European, old world capital. It has cobblestone streets and historic architecture and bougainvillea draped terraces and balconies and things like that. So it definitely delivers on old world charm in the old town of Funchal. And then on the newer side, it's more like resort focused, a bit more snazzy and upmarket. And so it has a little bit of everything, if you want one or the other. And there's also shopping, at least one shopping mall with a movie theater. And you can definitely meet all those sort of requirements in Funchal. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much the only area of the island, I'd say, where you could get those things. So if you're looking for more of a city environment, that would be your best bet. If not, you can definitely get away from the city. There's some really small villages where you'll have, just the sound of chickens in the morning and you can be totally isolated if that's what you want. But in terms of culture, yes, I would say it's well known for its cuisine. So as I mentioned, they have this really famous bread that they all attribute to the fresh water. They're famous for their laurel forests. So it's a type of tree that they use to make.
Also what bay leaves are made from. I know that.
That they use to make these kebab type things, skewered meat, basically. It reminded me of Brazil, like the meat that they bring to the table and cut it off a stick. And obviously it's famous for Madeira wine. So
about to ask, is that actually where it comes from? Yeah.
Yeah. And you can go visit the wine lodges. You can have a Madeira tasting. You can do a Madeira food pairing menu sort of thing. Actually, there's another libation from Madeira, which is poncha, which is where they use a lot of the tropical fruits that I mentioned, like passionfruit and pineapple, and they mix it with, I believe it's cane sugar liquor. Yeah, cane sugar alcohol, and they make a seriously potent cocktail out of this alcohol. But it's really delicious, and locals claim that it can cure your cold. It can fix any ailment that you might have. It's actually where we get the term for punch, is from this poncha drink, which is kind of cool.
So you've mentioned Funchal several times. It sounds like that's kind of the main happening part of the island. Are there any other areas or specific cities or towns that people should be aware of or that attract foreigners particularly?
Yes. So just generally speaking, there's kind of this north-south divide going on. And Funchal in the south, and all of the main population zones, the closest things that you'll have to a city, they're all in the south as well, or along the south coast of the island. So for instance, Ponta do Sol is another one. And that is where you find that digital nomad village. The north is going to be much more rustic and rural. I don't know how, because it's such a small island, but it's more elevated. The climate is slightly different, with slightly cooler, rainier temperatures. So tourists just don't make their way there as much, which makes it feel a lot more authentic, despite only being an hour or so drive from the places where it's all happening.
Interesting. Very cool. And would you say that it's in terms of like finding community, do you think that it would be easy enough in any place that you based yourself, or do you think you'd really have to be in the kind of the more vibrant part of things?
I think it all kind of just depends on you, like, and what you're looking for. So if you go up to the northern parts, you'll probably be neighbors with Madeiran people who are super friendly. That's another. You asked me about my first impressions, and that was one of the things I noticed first, was that people were exceptionally friendly there. I've traveled to a lot of places on my own, and this was one place where I felt like the most welcomed out of anywhere
Wow.
probably I've ever been. In terms of meeting people, again, so there's this kind of older wave of expats. And for socializing with them, I think the best things to do would be to join the Facebook groups, expats in Madeira, that type of thing. I'm part of those groups and they're very active. I see people constantly chatting about stuff. And then I was just going to add the style of socializing for the younger group, the digital nomad group. They have, again, that Slack communication platform. And I think it's a thing with digital nomad communities to constantly do stuff. And so there's always an opportunity to have a coffee with someone or to go to a networking event. Like they're very, very active. That's kind of the other side of being a digital nomad, is going out and meeting strangers constantly, because otherwise you're just kind of lonely on your own.
Yeah.
So depends on what you want. If you want to socialize with the older community, I'd say go to Facebook. For the younger community, or the young, I need to stop saying young, still working group,
Right.
you could join that digital nomad platform.
All right. So this obviously is a Portuguese territory, as we've mentioned. So I'm guessing we're going to need to learn Portuguese pretty well to be able to get by here, seeing as it's a pretty isolated place. How much do you think English is absolutely necessary from the get-go to be able to live your life? Or sorry, Portuguese is necessary.
To be honest with you, I don't think it is necessary in Madeira. Portuguese in general speak English pretty well, and maybe because it is so isolated, they've gone out of their way to make sure that they can accommodate the visitors that they get. So I found that everyone spoke English well enough. Sometimes there's grammatical mistakes. There's definitely an accent when speaking English to a local, but I was fully understood and could have even in-depth conversations with all the locals that I met. It wasn't an issue for me at all. And the expat that I interviewed for the issue backed that up as well. He said that he'd been living there for decades. He was British, and his Portuguese was terrible, but it hasn't really affected his life. That said, we always make the point that you should try to pick up at least the basics of the local language wherever you move. And in Madeira, they do have a strong regional accent. Just to be aware, they have a different way of speaking there, slightly different accent.
So I want to skip ahead briefly to talk a little bit more about infrastructure, because we've gotten a question about the medical facilities, which I kind of lump under general infrastructure. And because this is such an isolated place, healthcare would be a concern, right? It's a small island. You're kind of limited to whatever you can get there. Otherwise, you're however many hours away from another country, the mainland, whatever mainland that is that you're going to. So how did you find the medical services? How do expats there? How comfortable are people with the local medical facilities?
I got the impression, just on infrastructure in general, everything is kind of cutting edge. So they have 3 public hospitals and 3 private hospitals in Madeira. They're all close to Funchal, in and around Funchal, but across the island, you'll have things like health centers and pharmacies and little clinics where if you had an issue, on the northern tip of the island, you could find a place to help you out before you could get down to one of the major hospitals. One thing I noticed when I was just driving around was a massive new hospital under construction. And I saw the kind of renderings for it, and it looks like it's going to be an amazing state-of-the-art facility. And all the locals are really excited about it. I think one of the good things about settling here, as opposed to, say, the Algarve, for instance, is because there's a smaller population, 250,000 people, and at least 6 hospitals, a 7th on the way, you'll have less of a wait time for healthcare than you might say in Lagos in the Algarve. You can get seen faster by a doctor. And that's what locals told me as well, is that they're fully happy with their local healthcare. They trust it fully, and they don't have any issues in terms of, unfortunately, some places they have to wait for months to receive the care that they want. It's not the case in Madeira.
Yeah, I'm kind of staggered by the population density versus the amount of healthcare available. That seems far overreaching the needs of a population that small. But fantastic, great for them. So other infrastructure, the roads. You mentioned that this is kind of, the topographically interesting place. So how is it to drive here?
So I was the driver on my trip, and I'm not a confident driver at all, but I felt like I was driving in like Germany almost, not in terms of the speed, but in terms of how structured and organized everything was. It was all very clean, clear, organized, civil, and straightforward. And to tackle all the geography that you mentioned, they have tunnels all across the island. So every hillside has been blasted through, and there's a tunnel network going through it. And it was completely fine. It was really, the roads were great, and it was easy to navigate. So I was really impressed. And I've never driven through so many tunnels in my entire life, but they were all in great working condition. You could see the old road, the discontinued original road from before the tunnels. And there's no way I would even walk on those roads, let alone drive on them. So luckily they've replaced them, cliffside roads going up at crazy degrees. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we've covered water. You've already mentioned that the island is very proud of its ability to harvest its own water via nature. What about electricity? Are there any, outages that are common? What is the electrical grid? I'm assuming it's coming all from Portugal. And so is it pretty steady? Is that a concern? If there's a storm, would it knock out the power?
I saw something that looked like a massive hydro generator, but I don't know for sure what exactly the grid is. But in terms of outages, it didn't seem like it was an issue. I again, going off the person that I interviewed, he said that in his earlier years in Madeira, they might have outages here and there, but again, every year it's become a more well-rounded, user-friendly place to live. And so it doesn't seem like it's a concern.
And I'm also assuming that seeing as they've made an entire program out of digital nomadism, that the internet isn't a concern there either.
No, so they have super fast, super well-connected internet, as fast as you could want it, basically. And then in that town, Ponta del Sol, the digital nomad village, it's just open air, so anyone can tap into it if they want.
Very cool. I do want to get some cost of living from you. So we had the question about the rent, and that was for a short-term rental. If somebody was coming long-term, what would they expect to pay in a monthly rental fee?
I've got kind of mixed reviews about this. The people who've lived there for a long time say that prices have really gone up, and that's true of the entire world.
Right.
But they say for Madeira, especially, they're really feeling the impact. But I'll give you the figures for the main expense areas of life. And I think you can decide whether or not you think it's expensive. So if you're living in the center of Funchal in, let's say, a nice 80 square meter, 2-bedroom apartment, you'll pay about €1,000 per month. Utilities, ballpark €80 a month. For groceries, they have a mix of like big supermarkets as well as markets, like open air markets, I should say, where you can buy your produce. I would say about 200 to €300 a month, depending on how you shop. A dinner for 2 people, including drinks and maybe a dessert, about €50 for 2. And then things like, going for a beer is going to be under €2. A bottle of wine, it could be anywhere from €2 to €5. Not out, but if you're buying it like in a grocery store, wine is exceptionally cheap. A coffee is €1.50 roughly. I mean, you could have like a quick breakfast for about €3. So from my perspective, again, I'm coming from London, so I was thinking, wow, everything is, so affordable here. But for people who are living there, and especially Portuguese people who they don't make a great, their minimum wage isn't great. So they find it, they're feeling the squeeze. But for an expat or retiree, I think it would be probably still less expensive than life in the United States or Canada in most places.
I would say I mean, again, I'm living in Paris, so it's not a fair comparison, but it does seem very, very affordable to me. And I will wrap it up with one more question, actually 2 more questions. Sorry. What is the best residency option apart from that digital nomad visa? If you're a retiree, if you're not looking to work, what are the options? Is it the same as in mainland Portugal?
Yeah, so it'd be the D7, which is just the unofficial retirement visa, for which you need the income requirement is far lower. We usually say around 1,200 euros of income. Passive income is good for you to qualify, but I think officially it is the minimum wage, which is around 800 euros. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the more you can prove to an immigration officer, right, the better your chances are of being approved. So 1,200 ballpark. And that will get you, I think it's 1 year at a time, a temporary residency visa. And after 5 years, you can make it a permanent residency visa.
Okay, great. So good to know that if you are interested in if you are interested in making it permanent, or, for whatever purposes you want to stay there, you can also just go to the Portuguese government websites and figure out what the various options are. And last question, we can't let you off the hook without telling us, you have to try and think of some downsides.
I think the main one is going to be that you're on a relatively tiny island in the middle of nowhere. So if you're susceptible to island fever, or, you get itchy feet, you might find it a bit small for you. Mm-hmm. And isolating, there's the possibility that some crazy weather comes through and you can't fly out. So if that type of stuff is a risk for you, then perhaps, Madeira is not the one.
Awesome advice. Thank you so much. This has been a really fun conversation and exhaustive and comprehensive. Again, if anybody ever has any more questions, we are always here on the end of those email addresses that you get in every issue. So please don't hesitate to follow up with any more questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Kat. And thank you for everyone who tuned in. See you at the next one.
Thanks, Sophia. Bye.